Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neil Levesque, and I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College. Very excited about today's program, the Republican Party and Catholic voters in the 2020 election. This is a special series, a three-part series that we're doing with the Bosse Center for Religion and American Public Life at Boston College and the Leonard Greenberg Center for Study of Religion in Public Life at Trinity University in Hartford, Connecticut. Trinity's own Mark Silk, Professor Mark Silk, will also be participating today and will be posing questions of our panelists that you'll be submitting online. So if you're watching this and you have a question, please submit your question. If you are a journalist, please indicate, if possible, what news outlet you work for. Without further ado, we have three outstanding people who know so much about this subject on today's panel. All three, by the way, are authors, including Heidi Schlumpf. She is the executive editor of the National Catholic Reporter. She has 3 decades of experience covering this type of subject and religion in general in all different avenues. We have Mark Rozell. He is the founding dean of the Scholar Center, or Scholar School, I think I mispronounced that, of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Dr. Rozell is also the author of 9 books. And we have Governor John H. Sununu. Governor Sununu is the former White House Chief of Staff and, of course, the former governor of New Hampshire with extensive experience in national elective politics. So I want to welcome you all today, and I want to just ask each one of you to sort of just briefly touch upon the subject at hand with some opening sentence, starting possibly with you, Heidi.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm very excited to be part of this series and of today's event. There's a whole lot of interest, of course, in the quote-unquote Catholic vote, which is not monolithic, but still extremely important, especially in presidential elections. So I know we're all very cautious about polling data after the 2016 election, but there is some recent polling that just came out this week and last that might give us some insight into this topic of Catholics and the Republican Party. So just yesterday, EWTN News and Real Clear Opinion released a poll that, buried in some of their other things they were highlighting, had a pretty startling statistic. It showed that Catholics polled preferred Biden to Trump by a margin of 12 points. So of course, Biden is leading Trump more generally by about 7 points. So this poll makes quite a bit of noise about the frequency of Mass attendance, showing that those who do attend Mass at least once a week or more frequently, even daily, do prefer Trump. So again, we can debate about the adequacy of Mass attendance as an indicator of Catholicity during a pandemic when most of us are not able to go to Mass. But what I think is notable from this and other polls is that there is a difference when it comes to race. So when you're looking at Catholic voters, Trump does lead among Catholic voters, according to this EWTN poll, by about 5%. Now, Hispanic Catholics favor Biden by a much larger margin, 63% to 31%. And that holds true even for frequent Mass attendees. Some similar data from Pew Research Center last week confirms those numbers, that Hispanic Catholics support Biden. The Pew numbers were even higher with 65%. But also white Catholics were showing that they preferred Trump, 19 points higher, according to the Pew Research Center. So I think this is very interesting data and likely not good news for the Republican Party, but we have to remember that national polls don't take into account that we have an electoral college and the importance of swing states. After all, our current resident in the White House did not win the popular vote. And I'd love to talk a little more later about swing states and what Catholics are doing individually in some of those states, but maybe I'll be quiet, and I want to hear from some of our other panelists as well.
Professor Rozell, would you like to have
Yeah,
some comments?
thank you, Neil. Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to participate in this panel. Well, the question of the Catholic vote has always been a really complicated one in American electoral politics. And the title of a recent article in the National Catholic Reporter, I think, summarizes it very well. The Catholic vote will decide who wins, even if it does not exist. So I thought that was a rather clever title, but making the point that, as Heidi was saying, the Catholic vote is not monolithic, so we can't talk about a quote unquote Catholic vote as a single thing that moves in one direction entirely or the other. And as she was pointing out, the difference between white Catholics and Latino Catholics has been really key to understanding support for Republicans and Democrats, as well as regular church attendance tend to be much more Republican leaning. Those who are infrequent or non-church attenders tend to be more heavily Democrats. But the Catholic vote, I thought in 2016 was an underplayed, very important story in explaining Donald Trump's unexpected win. He picked up those 3 Great Lakes states that no one had expected him to win, states that have substantial Catholic populations. He won those 3 states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, combined by merely 107,000 votes. And with heavy concentrations of Catholic voters in those states, and the fact that Trump, according to the exit polls, won a majority of the Catholic vote, even though Hillary Clinton had won a majority of the national popular vote, makes it clear that the Catholic vote was a very important factor in the 2016 election. I believe that there was a lot of effort on the part of the Trump campaign to do direct outreach to Catholic voters. That was very important to the president making a breakthrough there. And we can talk about that a little bit more, whether the Clinton campaign, for example, lost an opportunity by not doing so substantial outreach in that election cycle targeted to Catholic voters. And of course, in this election cycle, there's a very conscious effort on the part of both campaigns to reach out to Catholic voters. But the question is whether the Democratic campaign has really picked up the lesson from 2016 and can play catch up, in effect, in doing the kind of outreach that, and even more, than the Trump campaign is doing right now.
Thank you, Mark. Governor Sununu?
Let me, first of all, thank you for letting me participate in this. I'm going to make 2 statements that seem to be contradictory, and then I'll try and explain why they're not. The first one is the Catholic vote as a Catholic vote is a very small vote. But secondly, the Catholic vote is the swing vote that quite often decides not only national elections, but state elections. And to really understand how that gets rationalized, you have to look at the history of the Catholic vote. You go back to, it became a prominent factor for study. If you go back to 1928 for the Al Smith race, where Al Smith was the first Catholic nominee that either party had ever put forward, and he lost. But his Catholic vote was represented primarily on the East Coast in the port cities of New York and Boston and Baltimore, and then what flowed out from there as the European Catholics and the Irish Catholics and the Italian Catholics moved into the United States. And for a period of time from Smith through Kennedy, Kennedy being the second Catholic nominee, and Kennedy getting elected, there was a generational shift taking place, and certainly a significant expansion of Catholic population across the country. But it remained primarily a Democratic vote in that period of time, primarily because of economic driving force. That when the immigrants arrived in the port city, their job, whether it was a job in a public entity or in a private entity, was quite often provided by the local political structure, which in the big cities was primarily a democratic structure. And so there was an affinity created at that time and passed down to the next generation as well. This did not start to change really until the mid-70s, early 80s, and it was really became, the Catholic vote became a target, if you will, for Republicans around that period of time. And let me talk about two particular elections. One was the Reagan election of 1980, where Reagan swept the country completely. You almost could not get a really good read, if you will, on how much influence he had over the particular Catholic vote, because his influence was universal across the board. But the fact is that he created a climate in which, on a national basis, Catholics did pull the Republican lever instead of the Democrat lever. And the second election I'd like to talk about, where Republicans began to give focus, was my own election in 1982 for governor in New Hampshire. 1982 was supposed to be, and turned out to be, a horrible year for Republicans in the US. I was the sacrificial candidate running against a very popular incumbent Democrat who was predicted to handily win a third term. But I recognized that the majority of the Democrat voters in New Hampshire were either French Canadian or Irish American, and that they were rather conservative, and nobody had appealed directly to them. And I made a significant effort, spent a lot of time on the west side of Manchester, a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 Democrat city at the time. I cut ads in French on the small French stations, and for lack of better words, I flaunted the fact that my wife and I had 8 kids. And I ended up winning the city of Manchester, which was extremely rare if it had ever been done before by a Republican. But I frankly went after these 2 Catholic constituencies, if you will, on a family. I didn't talk about it as a Catholic issue, but we talked about it as a family values issue. And what I found, and what I think Reagan found, is that if you get an entree into the mind of the Catholic vote by either culture or relationship, then they will listen to the other issues. What Reagan did in 1980 was appeal to the Eastern European Catholics on the basis of his conservative approach on the cultural issues, and they would listen to him on his anti-communist rhetoric, which was very popular in the Midwest, where the Slavs and the Czechs and so on, the Poles had come over, and it really resonated with them. And so I really suspect the key, over the years I have suspected the key to the Catholic vote, as small as it is, and what I mean by small is the real Catholic vote. And if you'll, I will define the real Catholic vote as those that do go to church and practice their religion in a public way. It doesn't mean that those that don't go don't practice it, but I'm talking about the ones that are willing to practice it in a public way. That is a small percentage. It's probably, I did not see the poll that was cited earlier by Heidi, but I would suspect it's about half of the total Catholic population. And that half now is tending to accept if you will, a cultural entree, a religious entree from Republican candidates, and willing to listen to the other issues. Let me address the statistic that was given on the Hispanic Catholic vote. That's a very deceptive statistic, I would imagine. I have not seen the details, but I would guess that the 60% Democrat leaning of that vote is driven primarily by the Californian Mexican Americans and by the New York Puerto Rican Americans, both of which are living in a Democrat-dominated area and really have not had an opportunity, if you will, in any constructive way, to be appealed to by Republicans. I would bet that if you took that out, those 2 states out of that poll, you would find that the Hispanic Catholics would respond almost on the same way as the white Catholics showed up in that poll. Now, where can the Catholic vote be the swing vote? It will be the swing vote in Florida, as the cultural entree to the Cuban Americans allows them to listen to the president's anti-Castro message, and it will resonate with them. It will resonate in Florida, believe it or not, with the Puerto Rican Americans who are there, because the president has just released the $11 billion that will go down for relief in Puerto Rico. And you will see a strong effort by the Republicans to play that card. It will play, the Catholic swing vote will be a swing vote in Pennsylvania, and whichever way it goes will determine, I believe, as Mark pointed out, which way Pennsylvania goes. It will be the swing vote in Minnesota. It will be the swing vote in Wisconsin. It will be the swing vote in Michigan. And it will be the swing vote in 2 or 3 other states, primarily on the basis of a more localized set of additional issues. And certainly one of the new issues, the issues that occurred on Friday, will be the issue of the states of the US Supreme Court replacement for Justice Ginsburg, who passed away. And I think you're going to find that in this election, the Catholic vote on a state-by-state basis is going to be the swing vote, and as such will be nationally the swing vote.
Governor Sununu, so let's hammer out that big issue that you mentioned last Friday, right after our last session of this series. This issue arises, and so we had the pandemic as sort of the central issue going into the election, and now we have a Supreme Court fight. How do you think that the Republicans will play this fight as it relates to the election in order to try to shore up some Catholic voters in some of these swing states?
Let me give again some context to this, because again, history on these on issues that relate even to this subset issue is important. As the Catholic vote began to be a target for Republicans in the 80s, the liberals involved in the Democratic Party, and frankly, the liberals involved in the Conference of Bishops, began to get nervous, and what they developed was an art form of equivalency. And I ran into it as governor with the Bishop of Manchester. When after I got elected, I went in to talk to him. He frankly had, in my opinion, worked very hard for my opponent, who was a big pro-choice liberal Democrat. When I sat down to talk to him about the difference between our positions, naturally my strong pro-life position came up. Hugh Gallen's strong pro-choice position came up, and I asked the bishop about it, and he said, well, you know, you're in favor of the death penalty, and Hugh Gallen is not. And I said that nobody has been executed in New Hampshire in 35 years. This is not an issue in this state. How can you make that an issue in your mind in choosing in the governor's race? He says, well, I find the difference is an equivalent difference that balances out. And that's what the liberal side of the Conference of Bishops has done over the years with a variety of issues. Why do I bring that up? Because what we are going to see in this battle for a Supreme Court justice is a lot of rationalization by I think there's 20 Catholics in the Senate. I'm not sure, but I think there's 20, maybe 22. You're going to see a lot of rationalization by the Democrat Catholics in the Senate on the basis of whatever they will create in their mind as an equivalency to attack what I think will be a Catholic woman nominated by Donald Trump. I think the two leading candidates are Amy Coney Barrett and Barbara Lagoa. I think My personal guess is that it would be one of those, and how the liberal Catholics in the Senate handle this nomination process is going to be extremely interesting, and I think has the possibility, I think the directness of whatever they do has a possibility of being even more important than the decision that's made.
So following up on that, Heidi, as you're doing reporting and reporters are coming into the paper, are you seeing also where Catholic voters are sort of tuned into the Supreme Court in a certain way, the Supreme Court nomination? Do you think that this is a definite issue that's going to split, let's say, traditional voters from Catholic voters?
Well, yeah, I'd like to respond to a few things the governor said. So you could hardly accuse the bishops' conference these days of not focusing enough on abortion. Although just before we gathered here, I did see a statement come out with the bishops calling attention to the executions happening this week, bookending the award being given to Attorney General Bill Barr tomorrow at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, where he's being honored for his Catholicism, even though on this issue he is not following church teaching in the institution.
On the contrary, he is. Church teaching has always accepted just executions.
Excuse me. So what I'm trying to say is that while those two things may not be equivalent in terms, especially in your race back when there was no death penalty, I think at the national level, when we're looking at the presidential election, that a lot of Catholic voters are looking at what they would consider other important life and death issues, including the handling of the coronavirus pandemic, the economic issues, immigration, the treating of families and other people at the border. So a number of these other issues are coming up. What happens is that abortion gets tagged as sort of the most important issue to Catholic voters. And for some it is. And I think for Trump's base and for the Republican Party's base, both Catholic and otherwise, abortion and ending abortion through making it illegal or overturning Roe versus Wade is very important. The common wisdom is that any focus on the Supreme Court will help a conservative candidate, and that may be true. I think it's too early to tell in answer to your question, Neil, but I do think the fundraising that the Democrats have done since the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg indicates it might be equaling out this time. I do think it's interesting, again, that these polls consistently show that abortion is not named as the most important issue by Catholic voters. So this Pew poll that I was just mentioning, they asked what's very important for their vote. Higher than average, 38% of white Catholics, 39% of Hispanic Catholics. EWTN, abortion, and even religious liberty did not make the top 10 most important issues. The top issues, the top two issues in both polls are the economy and healthcare. And I think I'll repeat what my colleague, Michael Sean Winters, often says, though, that abortion is a totem, he calls it. It kind of represents a host of other beliefs, these culture issues the governor was talking about that Republicans have been very good at using to appeal directly to Catholic and other religious voters. And it kind of says, you know, we're with you on, you're like me, and so you can vote for me. Now that works on the other side for liberals and Dems too, though.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Neil, can I jump in here? Because I was just going to mention that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was looking at that EWTN poll earlier today. I just want to caution that I think the Catholic vote probably is a bit closer than that poll is suggesting. So they polled a sample that said a majority voted for Hillary Clinton. So they slightly oversampled Democrats. Donald Trump won the overall Catholic vote according to the exit polls that were done in the election, 52 to 45. And this poll had pretty much the opposite percentages. So I think it's probably a little bit closer than that. And the other thing too is the question of who votes. So the Latino Catholic vote, indeed, as Heidi points out, is heavily Democrat leaning and has been for a long time. And the white Catholic vote is Republican leaning. So Trump got about 60% of the white Catholic vote. Hillary Clinton got about 67% of the Latino Catholic vote in 2016. But Latino voting always lags significantly behind the Latino segment of the American eligible voting population. And the white Catholic vote, of course, has a better turnout. So even though that poll shows about a 12 percentage points difference, I think reality, it's significantly closer than that now between the two candidates.
And much more so in the battleground states.
Yeah, and that's the key, of course.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Which is why so much of the outreach by groups by Republican groups trying to appeal to Catholic voters is happening in those battleground states. So, but it's all been stymied by the pandemic. I reported before all of the coronavirus stuff happened back in December and January about CatholicVote.org, which was this group that was using this tactic of geofencing, where they were capturing the cell phone data from people who were physically attending Mass, and then able to take that data, cross-reference it with voter rolls. And CatholicVote.org is a very well-funded organization, and it announced this huge mobilization campaign in Wisconsin to start with, right? Because Wisconsin, as a state where Trump only won by less than 23,000 votes in 2016, they identified these people who were physically attending Mass 3 times in a 90-day period, and I'm sure they were polling or capturing data in white suburban areas. They found that half of 200,000 voters they identified had not been registered to vote. So this massive campaign to register them to vote, because the understanding was as I'm not going to use the term real, as Governor Sununu says, but the Catholic voters that they think they count the most are those who attend Mass more regularly and thus more likely to vote Republican.
And that gets to an interesting thread that Catholic priests traditionally do not stand up at the altar and start telling their parishioners who they should vote for. And how does that show up in some of your religious reporting, where, say, evangelical masses would do that type of, would be their parishes will directly sort of tell them who they should vote for, and that is much more of a almost shyness that the Catholic Church has. And when one priest or one bishop sort of steps out of that mold, they get kind of brought back in. Tell us about some of the reporting you've done on that.
Asking me? Well, I guess what we're just seeing all over this year in this campaign is just a lot more appeal to religious voters. So it's not just the Republicans who have figured out that appealing to moderate suburban women who might be practicing their religion, Catholic or otherwise, would be very smart in terms of when the election is so close. And I challenged that exit poll data that showed that Trump got the Catholic vote, but more accurate data later showed that Hillary did, but very, very slim margin. So, and for all intents and purposes, it's half and half. I think a lot of the speakers at the Republican convention were addressing Biden's Catholicism and the issues that were meant to be appealing to Catholics. So you had Sister Dee Dee Byrne, who was calling Trump the most pro-life president the nation has ever had. You had former Notre Dame football coach saying Joe Biden is Catholic in name only, from which the president of Notre Dame then sort of distanced himself. But so then immediately following the conventions, we did start seeing a number of clergy and even bishops speaking out about the presidential candidates in a way that we hadn't seen before. Most famously, there was this priest from La Crosse, Wisconsin, again, note that swing state, where he did a viral video that, in addition to a number of anti-immigrant remarks and other homophobic things, said you can't be a Catholic and a Democrat. And this has been a messaging that a number of Catholics have been hearing for years. So Catholic equals Republican, and you can't be a Catholic and a Democrat. Bishop Strickland from Tyler, Texas, on social media endorsed that. And there was quite a reaction in a lot of circles because, as you said, Neil, this is not something we normally have going on in Catholic churches. And now we have other bishops who are speaking out and saying, maybe not the exact opposite, but at least saying, no, you don't have to vote one way or the other. And we had that even, of course, on your panel last week here.
Yeah.
This is excellent.
Neil, let
Yes,
me
Governor.
just go back to this battle that's going to take place over the Supreme Court nominees. If it is one of those two Catholic judges, that will make the Catholic vote a more examined vote as we go through this process. And it will come not on the Catholic issues, but on the issue of how people will be treating religion as a whole. I think if they really attack Amy Coney Barrett again on her Catholicism, if she is the nomination, you will see her defended by people across the board in different religions, because they will feel that she is entitled to be strong on her religion. If they go after Judge Lagoa, if they slip at all and allow the Republicans to accuse them of being, if you will, racist because she's a Cuban American, that issue will be driven hard. So the way the Democrats will go after these two for their strong conservative credentials is going to be a very difficult task. And it will be an art form that we have to wait to see if they can handle.
Excellent. So I want to turn now to Professor Mark Silk of Trinity College, who has many of our audience questions. You're muted.
I'm muting myself. Thanks very much, Neil. Delighted to be here. I'm going to take question manager's privilege and direct questions at particular panelists. It doesn't prevent anybody else from jumping in, and begin with a question for Heidi. And this continues the Supreme Court discussion. And it is it permissible for a senator to raise the question of a person's religion, in this case, a nominee to the Supreme Court, if they're a Catholic integralist? And if they say yes, can they ask what that means to them with regard to how they interpret the law? In other words, is it fair to probe a person's intellectual beliefs as connected to their religious commitments?
Well, I guess that's a great question. As a journalist, I don't know that I want to voice my own opinion here, except to say that I think, of course, it's going to matter. I agree with Governor Sununu that the Democrats in the Senate are going to be very, have their hands tied about what they can say, precisely if, and it looks like it will happen, this vote happens before the election, if it happens before November 3rd. So any sort of questioning that appears, like he said, to be questioning their ability to practice their faith, or would be any reference to someone's background, if it's their ethnicity as well as their faith, could be very negatively perceived, as we saw with the Dianne Feinstein question of, the dogma lives loudly in you, or whatever she said. I'm not quoting exactly. I think even if the Senate Democrats ask fair questions about what the governor called strong conservative credentials, I think that the Republicans will use that to accuse them of attacking their faith or ethnicity. So I think they are really in a bind there. And another reason why probably not the best thing that this vote might be happening before the election.
What does that mean, not the best thing?
Well, just problematic for a free and open debate about whether the candidate is appropriate or not, because it very much will be, everyone will be on stage thinking about what's happening on November 3rd, not just about what's best for the court.
Let me turn now to Professor Rozell. Mark, hi. This is a question really about whether there's a difference between the sort of the Catholic vote and we're really talking about sort of the white Catholic vote and the white evangelical vote. Is there a kind of way in which one can differentiate those sort of religious, faith-based voting blocks that's useful in distinguishing different elements of the sort of Republican Party religious base?
Right. There is an important difference, which is the white evangelical vote is even much more Republican than is the white Catholic vote. So the exit polling data said that Donald Trump won 81% of white evangelicals in 2016, about 60% of white Catholic voters. The evangelical vote is the strongest core of Trump's political base. They have stayed with him throughout his presidency, whatever people's opinions about the Russia investigation, handling of the pandemic, handling of the economy, the numerous controversies. I've even had a few panels with evangelical leaders where we talked about, the Trump presidency and the intersection of religion and politics. And very commonly they say those two appointments to the Supreme Court, okay? When Donald Trump in his last debate with Hillary Clinton said that he's 100% pro-life and that he will appoint pro-life judges to the Supreme Court, they said that sealed the deal. And they're very used to, in the past, Republican candidates for the presidency making a lot of positive noise about what they'll do for the evangelical community, conservative evangelicals, I mean, only to find that once in office, the successful candidates, that is, tended to put the social issues on the back burner. So they tend to see Trump as the real thing and somebody who keeps his commitments on the social issues, and that's extremely powerful to them. But the white Catholic vote is not there to the same extent as the white evangelical vote for the Republicans generally, and especially for Donald Trump. And the data that Heidi is mentioning suggests that there's been some significant drop-off in support among white Catholics for Trump, whereas the data show that there has not been a similar significant drop-off in white evangelical support for this president.
True, and if I could just add that the Pew study also asked people the question in a way like, are you voting for Donald Trump or against Biden? And conversely, are you voting for Biden or against Donald Trump? And white evangelicals, almost twice as many said they were voting for Donald Trump as white Catholics. So that resonates with what you said, Mark.
I'd like to turn to Governor Sununu now. There have been a number of questions sort of focusing on sort of, we're asking for discussion of other issues that are of concern or could be considered as being of concern to Catholics, including immigration, concern for the poor, the sort of others, the social justice issues, if you will. And I wonder, Governor, if you think that the Trump White House's, the Trump administration's position on those have driven some Catholics away.
I don't have any data, but I suspect no more than they've driven any other part of the country away. On the immigration issue, I find it interesting that anytime I sit down to discuss the immigration issue with any members of the clergy, and I raise the point that open borders are really an incentive for trafficking of women and children and drug flow, they acknowledge it. And when I say, well, how can you support something that promotes such an evil thing, they like to change the subject and move on. Immigration is another one of those equivalencing issues that the liberal hierarchy of the church has brought in to try and balance out against the life issue. And frankly, I don't think it has any special appeal to Catholic voters. I think it has the same appeal to Catholic voters or non-appeal to Catholic voters as it does to other voters. I think the same thing. Now they're finding that that immigration issue isn't biting as hard as they had hoped. I've always said that the minute the Hispanic vote goes 51% Republicans, the Democrats will stop asking for open borders. And I think you're beginning to see a lot of that, because with the outreach that Trump has done to the Hispanic community, you're beginning to see a huge chunk of the Hispanic community who are driven by an entrepreneurial spirit begin to question their historic commitment to the Democrat Party. And I really do think this is a continuing trend. It will continue beyond Trump. And I think if there's any bad news at all for the Democrat Party in terms of, quote, Catholic voters, it is that the Hispanic Catholic voters will begin to turn Republican. And the immigration issue may be one of the reasons they do it. Because if you poll Hispanic voters outside of California and New York, almost half of them are opposed to open borders.
Perhaps we could get a little clarification on the Catholic position on the death penalty at the moment. That's been raised in the questions. Heidi, you want to address that?
Please, and I don't have my catechism in front of me, except to say that, yes, it's true that Catholic teaching does allow for the death penalty in rare instances. And I think a number of theologians and canonists would say that we're not in that situation here when life without parole is an option. I was looking through some back issues and seeing about 5 years ago that 4 different Catholic publications, including NCR, but also the more conservative National Catholic Register, which we're often confused with the other NCR, or they consider us the other NCR, we came together and did a editorial about the death penalty because there was unanimity among us about the need to be moving away from that. So it is stronger than it used to be in the catechism as well, and that there are rare instances where it may be necessary, but we're not in that situation in the US here.
The fascinating thing to me about trying to equivalence the death penalty with abortion is that the death penalty involves a few hundred lives. The abortion issue is in the millions. It just boggles my mind that Catholic bishops can use that to argue that there is no difference.
Yes, and you will see conservative Catholics also point out about the innocence or guilt of lives involved there. Of course, that is not Catholic teaching because we see all life as valuable. And I think it's partially why the numbers of people who have died from the coronavirus, because those numbers are pretty high, are affecting voters as well, especially if they've known someone who has died. I think you're right about the Latino voters. We've seen data that shows that Trump is not winning Latino voters, but he's doing better. And Governor Sununu says it's possible that will continue in the future. I've yet to be able to find any data, or even we haven't been able to do any reporting yet that can show us how that parses out with Catholics, specifically Latinos. But you're definitely right that the Latino vote is not monolithic either. And we have a lot of differences between Mexicans and Cubans and Venezuelans, et cetera.
Here's a hypothetical from Mark Rozell. Let's suppose that the Supreme Court does overturn Roe v. Wade in the next session. Will the Conference of Bishops, which has trended rather conservative in recent years, be willing to turn to the Democratic Party as being more consistent with overall Catholic values? That's a question.
Well, I don't know the answer as to what they would do, but I do have a different scenario I'd like to mention. Imagine a future in which Roe versus Wade is overturned. Look at overall national public opinion on the issue of abortion rights. What happens? The issue goes to the states. I would imagine a majority of the states, a significant majority, would enact state-level laws, legalizing abortion rights, reinstituting the protections that Roe provides for for access to abortion, right? And some states, of course, would not. But I think that would be that would end up being a politically terrible moment for the Republicans, that the national debate would become so overheated on this issue, and that campaigns would be made in parts of the country primarily about that issue, that I think ultimately would backfire on the Republicans. I know Governor's going to disagree with me maybe here, and I'd love
No,
the
no, I'm not. I'm going to actually agree with you.
It's a danger to the Republicans.
I'm going to agree with you.
Yeah.
I don't think Roe v. Wade will be overturned.
Yeah,
I think what will happen is bright lines may be drawn.
Mhm.
Last trimester or something like that, heartbeat. There will be bright lines drawn that will allow the states to do things, but do things within a domain that I don't think would be as inflammatory as would occur under the scenario that you would describe if it were completely eliminated.
Yeah.
Let me turn back to the governor. This is a question from Andrew Sylvia of the Manchester Ink Link, which I take to be a journalistic enterprise.
The Manchester what?
Ink Link.
Okay.
And he notes, your reference to the history of the Catholic vote in New Hampshire and in states like Pennsylvania. What do you think will be the importance of the Catholic vote specifically in New Hampshire in this cycle, this coming election, both compared to other states and in terms of the result of the races in the Granite State?
Two things to note. One, New Hampshire now has about 24% Catholics. I would say still about 60% of them are registered as Democrats. I think in the governor's race, the governor will get 70% of the Catholic vote. And in the presidential race, Donald Trump will probably lose it 52-48, 53-47. And the trouble is you'll never be able to find out.
Okay. Let's go on to go back to Heidi. Here's a question. Why do conservative Catholics seem to focus on judging the sin of a struggling mother instead of focusing on addressing the issue of abortion proactively and preventatively by doing a better job of teaching children to conceive within stable marriages and to use NFP to balance procreation with the care for creation? Well, there's a simple question you can do in 25 words or less.
I love questions about abortion. They're very touchy. So yeah, that's hard for me to answer, except to say that many of the pro-life Catholics that I know, whether they're conservative or progressive, do not focus on the sin of the mother. They're focused on the life in the womb. So I do think that that's maybe not a fair way to set up the question. That said, there are differing opinions about pro-life issues and about abortion. And the one that's most interesting to me is about how to decrease. We've already acknowledged here that overturning Roe versus Wade, whatever its political ramifications for Republicans, does not make abortion go away. It goes back to the states where there will be other fights and it will still be legal in some places at least. So, there are pro-life Catholics who believe that there are other ways to decrease abortions. Many of the things that were in that question in terms of providing a social safety net. Obviously, when the economy is doing well and lower income and middle income people are doing well, abortions go down as well. So all of these issues are interrelated. Why some people are single issue and want to oversimplify, I'm not sure, but I think it has something to do with that totem I was talking about before, that this sort of stands for something else, like we're all together, we're part of this, let's be honest, white, nostalgic, how things used to be. Let's preserve that culture. And I think that that's, you know, abortion kind of becomes, it stands in for a lot of other things.
All right. This comes from your own reporter, Heidi, Chris White. There have been some recent whistleblower reports of forced hysterectomies of migrants in ICE detention. Do you expect either Governor Sununu or Mark Rozell that might have the effect of peeling off some pro-life Catholic voters?
No, I don't think as an issue that's going to go anywhere in this campaign. First of all, it hasn't been resolved. I think there should be, if it's a serious concern, there should be an investigation and a clear analysis of what happened, but that's not going to happen before the election.
Yeah,
I have nothing to add to that. Yeah.
go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, no, I said I have nothing to add to the governor's statement. I think that's right.
Yeah, I
What
think it's too early to say on that, although conditions in ICE detention centers are something that I think some Catholic voters do care about. If I could just insert here, I've heard from one of my colleagues who wants me to make sure that I mention that Pope Francis did update the catechism to say, a new understanding has emerged of the significance of penal sanctions imposed by the state, and thus the death penalty is inadmissible.
A
So,
lot of people are holding their hands over their ears until the Argentinian socialist is gone.
All right. Let me pull back from this. This is a question actually from one of my students, and I think it's a good one. I was wondering if the speakers could discuss how salient Catholic identity is today, and whether or how it interacts with the national political and media landscape that sometimes seems to focus on the evangelical vote. In other words, I guess this really gets, Governor, at your point about a small Catholic vote and a larger vote that comes from people who identify as Catholics. But let's start with Mark on this one.
Sure. I don't think Catholic identity carries the importance that it did, say, for my parents' or grandparents' generation, right? People who voted for John Kennedy out of a great deal of pride, and Catholic identity then was critically important, I think. But think about, say, 2004, right? George W. Bush, a Methodist, won the Catholic vote significantly over former Catholic seminary student John Kerry. So I don't think Catholic identity is what draws Catholic votes. Catholics, like all other Americans, right, are going to prioritize various policy issues. You know, we've talked about some of those today, and we've talked about some of the inevitable divisions that come up all of the time in discussions about the Catholic vote, whether it's the social justice issues or the life issues that get prioritized, and different Catholics prioritize different issues, just like all Americans do. But I don't think having a Catholic on the ticket in 2016 helped Hillary Clinton with the Catholic vote, which, again, the exit polls said she lost. Heidi saying later data suggests it was closer than that. But I don't think it made a difference at all, actually. So of all the factors driving the Catholic vote, I don't think Catholic identity is very high on the list at this point.
Let me pile on a question there, which is, do you think that also applies to Joe Biden? There's at least from the polling data that Heidi cited at the beginning of this webinar, one might conclude that it's somehow dawned on some Catholics that Joe Biden is one of them. But do you think that Joe Biden, being a Catholic, whether some bishops regard him as a bad Catholic or not, is going to make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, if it makes a difference just barely at the margins, that could be important in itself, right? At the margins was absolutely critical in 2016. I think there are many other factors that drive Catholic voting that are much more powerful than Catholic identity. So I don't think that's an automatic win for Joe Biden with Catholic voters. But again, if it makes a small difference at the margins in a very close campaign, we could be talking about this in a seminar post-election, how the Catholic vote was critical to the outcome.
It could actually work the other way.
How is that? What do you think?
I think there's the segment of the Catholic, go to church every week Catholics may not be comfortable with the way Biden has comported himself on issues like the life issue over the years. And they may feel an extra level of animosity there.
Aren't they already there, though, Governor, with the Republicans?
Yeah, but the question is, the question is his Catholic identity going to be a plus or a minus? And what I'm saying, they are already there, and it may, when you add it all up, be net minus.
Yeah, I think the outreach to Catholics, the different constituencies, Heidi was talking about this before, the intensified outreach by religiously motivated groups, right, to various voters is absolutely critical. I did a little book on the Catholic vote in the 2016 elections, and I talked to people in the religious conservative movement, tried to find people in the Hillary Clinton campaign who might have been a part of some Catholics for Clinton, organized effort. There wasn't really much there, but under the radar for most Americans, but I think was very important for engaging with some segments of the Catholic community that, you're talking about. The Trump campaign was doing a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And they're doing a lot now. And you do a web search right now, Catholics for Trump, a beautiful website shows, and there's Mary Madeline and Newt Gingrich and Mick Mulvaney, and there's Catholics on all different policy issues and all kinds of links to donate and get involved. Do a web search on Catholics for Biden, and the first thing that pops up directs you to the Biden for President website, the general website. So I think the Biden people are running a little bit behind on this in terms of the outreach that's absolutely critical to this
Trump
campaign.
kept it up. Trump kept it up from day one. I mean, they never stopped. This has been going on since 15.
Yep.
Yeah, I will say that I think Biden is certainly doing a heck of a lot better than Hillary Clinton did in terms of outreach to religious voters and talking about his own religious or Catholic identity. Maybe the Democrats are learning from the Republicans like you, Governor, who realized how important the outreach was. I think the issue of Catholic identity is a very important one for whomever asked that question. And I think one thing to keep an eye on for the future is younger people who are Catholic or growing up Catholic. So we have this disaffiliation. The churches, if you only count the real Catholics, according to Governor Sununu, then we have an even smaller.
Yeah, it's a serious problem. Look, but it's a serious problem for all religions. And in an odd way, I think it's a serious national issue beyond Catholicism. I think it's difficult to see a world without much grounding of a significant portion of our young people, whether it's Catholic, Jewish, Islamic, or whatever. I'm more worried about the overall loss of grounding than I am of the loss of grounding to Catholics in particular.
Yeah, we're gonna agree on that because we all care about the church, of course. But for politicians, it means if you're reaching out only to those church Catholics in the future, that might be a smaller group.
Yeah.
Governor, maybe I'll end with this question before kicking it over to Neil. A number of our questioners, I guess it's fair to say, took offense at your crack about Pope Francis. Do you want to say a little more about it?
No, I really don't. I am very concerned about the church. There's been a number of articles that coincide with the concern that I have. I really do feel that the Pope has brought a perspective that is anti-capitalism, a perspective that is pro-socialism, a perspective that has been soft on our culture issues, a perspective that is in love with woke. And I feel as a Catholic who cares about my religion that he is doing things. He tries to be subtle about it, but he is doing things that I think undermines where Catholicism was the day before he became Pope. And I don't think he's entitled in this period of time to change the tenets of Catholicism the way he's trying to do it. So I have no regrets.
Okay.
Can I just mention politically, Mark, remember the Pope got involved in the 2016 campaign when he made a critical comment about Donald Trump and said,
Yes.
you know, we should be building bridges instead of putting up walls. I think that backfired, actually. I think it helped mobilize a lot of religious conservatives for Trump in that campaign and had the opposite political effect, I think, of what was intended in that case.
I think he's willing to stick his toes in political arenas that he just should not be. And therefore, if he's willing to do that, then I'm willing to make my comments.
All right.
Well,
For a
on that,
positive view of our pontiff, go to ncronline.org.
Neil, it's all yours.
on that comment, yeah, I will just say that I would suspect that that's not Pope Francis over Governor Sununu's left shoes. I believe that's John Paul, from what I could tell from the
John
Zoom.
Paul
so,
II, yes.
yes, excellent. So I want to thank everyone for being on today. This has been a wonderful panel. We have a great partnership with Boston College and Trinity College, and our three panelists are just the knowledge that they provided us during this hour was just fantastic, and hope to do it again. Remember, we have one more left in our series, so if you're watching today, sign up for next week. And panelists, thank you very, very much, Mark, Heidi, and Governor Sununu.